Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. Today we're going to talk about math and Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. It is my favorite Star Wars movie. It is also my favorite movie, and I argue that it's the best Star Wars movie and one of the best movies, just period, if not the best. And just to be clear, that is my personal opinion. You may differ in your thoughts on Empire, but that's where I'm at. So that gives you an idea for what you're in for. I am excited, and I have like overwhelmingly positive things to say about this movie. So with that in mind, this is how I see things going. I'm going to talk about some of the history behind The Empire Strikes Back, and how it kind of came to be, to an extent. And I'll talk about how math is used like inside the universe and outside the universe along the way, and some things that came out of The Empire Strikes Back. It was a big movie. It was huge. A lot of people know it, and it definitely had a like ginormous impact on our culture. And not to mention, there's merchandising that came out of that. There's gaming. I'm sorry, there's games that came out of that. There's a whole lot of other things that came out of that. Because if the initial Star Wars, broke barriers and, put itself on the map, Empire somehow took it up another notch. So, with that in mind, there will be spoilers. There will be spoilers for The Empire Strikes Back, for sure. If you want to be extra safe, just assume I'm going to spoil all of Star Wars. I realistically won't, but I don't want to hold myself back, and I like giving these warnings when I do a video like this. So if you're on board, let's get into it, and if you're not, okay, that's fair. But yeah, again, spoilers are hit. That being said, let's go. So, Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, a sequel to Star Wars, which again broke a lot of like ground. And this movie, it had to be bigger, it had to be better, it had to do some different things, right? And sequels were not known for that at the time, and arguably still are not. So, with The Empire Strikes Back, it came out in 1980, 3 years after the first Star Wars, and interestingly enough, within universe, Empire takes place 3 years after the events of the first Star Wars, aka A New Hope. So that's kind of cool. Um, in terms of like how it comes together or how it came together, like there's a lot to it, but I want to hit some of the big points. So after the first Star Wars came out, right, it made a lot of money. A sequel was greenlit. George Lucas arguably didn't have to make it. He had already made a lot of money, um, but he wanted to. But he didn't want to be involved in the same capacity. Some of that was like stress from making that first one, and some of it was believing certain other people could bring some something new to the table. They can guide him along the way because like, he still made the story, but he wanted to like have the screenplay handled differently, the directing differently. He took the role of executive producer, and he hired Lee Brackett as the initial writer for the screenplay. And she was able to work with him and get him like a whole like a draft. And so, with that in mind, though, her story did take a turn. She died of cancer. So George Lucas took her draft. He worked on one of his own, and then after that, he brought in Lawrence Kasdan to also do a draft. And so that's where we end up with uh, Irvin Kershner being the director. So, like, I mean, a lot of people joke about, like, George Lucas, and sometimes rightfully so, but, like, it's not like he was unaware of his limitations, and it's not like he was unwilling to, reach out to different people. And that's true even of the prequels. It just, like, it was very different by the time he got to the prequels. And he ended up, in order to continue, taking on, like, a lot of roles. Um, and, to varying effects. I have my issues with the prequels, but there are some good parts too. But with that in mind, this is a video about The Empire Strikes Back. So back to that. Initially, right? It started, or at least they had the idea that it would start on an $80 million budget, or sorry, $8 million budget. But soon, and even more so over time, costs ballooned, where it ended up costing them like $30.5 million, which is a lot of money. So this movie had to be successful before, sure, but now it really had to be successful because it was kind of a make or break kind of moment. Like George Lucas had invested a lot of money, even got loans, and if he didn't make that money back, a lot of people would be impacted by that. And Fox had their deal with him at the time in terms of distribution, and that's interesting because they were able to make it so that Empire was in theaters for 28 weeks instead of the typical 12 weeks at the time. And when it came out, it made its money back hard. So again, like it cost 30.5 million to make, right? And it ended up that first run around, that first go around, making like $400 million about. It did get re-released over time and has made around 540 million, which is a lot of money. It is a hugely successful movie, and I dig it. And so that's a little bit of the background with that, and I want to talk about some of the math involved in that and in the process and getting it out there, some of the after effects, and like I said, I'll be sharing my opinions on the movie as we go along. So when it comes to the math involved, kind of like outside of it, you probably picked up on some things, right? Like along the way. Not only is there like math in our daily lives and how we keep track of it, right? Because we keep track of things via time, right? There's math in that on every conceivable level, right? Whether we're dealing with seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, or weeks, months, years, etc., right? But that's just a minor thing, right? Because I think like when you deal with that and you deal with the passage of time, you deal with math and that and what could happen. Like, so we have 3 years in the real world, 3 years within universe, and a lot can happen in 3 years. So I think that's interesting. But it goes deeper than that, right? Because not only is there math in just like when these things came out, but there's math in the numbering with the movie because like what The Empire Strikes Back is episode 5, so it's the 5th chronologically, but it's the 2nd by release order. And in terms of Star Wars properties that have made it out there, actually the 3rd thing to come out because the holiday special happened. But so we have like math and time and just us keeping track of it, math and the passage of time in the movies and the universe. There's math and like I said, the numbering of the movie and where it takes place or when it takes place in terms of Star Wars coming out. But there's also math and the money involved, right? There's math in the budget. There's math in taking out loans. There's math in hiring out your staff and the different things that you pay them. Like I don't remember every single thing that everyone got paid or know the full extent of it, but like I know like John Williams, who made the music, he got paid 250 million, or sorry, $250,000 to record the score. And so there's math in that and other and hiring other people. But I bring up him in particular because Star Wars repeatedly has come with some really solid hits, right? And when he recorded the score, he had to estimate how long it would be. It ended up being like 74 minutes, which is kind of crazy to think about. But when you're making a score, right, not only do you have to consider how long it takes, but you have to, or like how long it will be, but you'll have to consider how long it'll take to make it. You'll have to consider the construction of those songs and that album as a whole. And there's a lot of math in music. There's a lot of structure to it. There's a lot of math in the patterns, a lot of math in how long you'll be playing this note or that note. There's a lot of math in the logistics of having this instrument do this and that instrument do that. There's a lot of math in the conducting in addition to the composition, right? There's a lot of math with the people who are playing the instruments, right? There's a lot of math going on with the instruments themselves, from their shapes to any potential parts on there. But there's also math in the person playing it, whether they're using their fingers or breathing, or kind of their whole body in a sense, right? There's math in all of that, and that's really cool. And again, like there's math in how long it takes to record all of this stuff, and then there's math in the recording itself, right? And there's math in how it's implemented in different scenes in the movies. And like the soundtrack for Empire Strikes Back is something that has been released multiple times, and so there's math in that too. And so yeah, there's just math across the board. Like you have costumes, you have effects, you have lighting, you have sound. Like I said, you have the music, you have your cast and your crew, and there's math in getting everything together and how it functions, right? Like if you are the crew, or sorry, if you're the cast, right, you have to worry about your lines. Um, you have to worry about the volume. You have to worry about how you say them. You have to worry about pace. You have to worry about your position. You have to worry about your breathing, and there's math in all of that. You have to worry about you getting paid. There's math in all that too. And if you're the crew, like there's so many crew members, right? Like, and I said, sound, lighting, all that sort of stuff that comes up, and there's math and all that, right? Because you have to have just the right lighting, just the right sound, just the right volumes, right? And you have to implement everything in a very complex, complicated way. And there's numerous people involved in this sort of thing. And so there's a lot of math and a lot of moving parts in the behind the scenes, right? And going back to like the script, right? There's a lot of math in just having that happen, right? Because one, there's math in going to people like Lee Brackett and Lawrence Kasdan. There's math in their payment, and in terms of them and like George Lucas and his draft, right? You have to consider how long it's going to take, and different things that don't normally get talked about, I suppose, because right, how long it takes, how many scenes you have, how long those scenes are going to be in theory, and how everything comes together. And I guess like I don't talk about it in normal conversation, but I'm sure if you're living in that world, you do. But for me, I think about those things, and it's like there's math in that, right? Because I'm thinking about how long the script has to be, or I'm looking at how long it'll end up, and I gotta think about, well, how long is the movie going to be, and I gotta think about how many scenes, like I said, like right, and there's math and all that, and you can get something like for Empire, like 100 pages or about 100 pages worth of script for this like 2 hour movie, because it's about 2 hours. And there's math in that. And there's math in how long a movie runs. There's math in the box office angle that I had mentioned earlier, and like how much they made. And then there's like fallout from that, right? There's math in the merchandising. There's math in how the movie gets distributed. There's math in who gets their cut, because Fox made a deal with the distribution parts, and I think it was something like for the first $20 they got 50%, and if the movie made over 100 million, they got around 80% or something crazy like that, and that movie definitely made more than 100 million. So there you go. And the other thing about this movie, right, is they were given more of a chance to take those sort of risks because Star Wars was such a phenomenal success. But again, Empire had to be bigger. It had to be better. Right? And so I want to talk about, just really quickly some things in the universe that, I want people to consider before like talking about why this movie is just the best to me. So real quick, like there's I think the best way to think about Star Wars in terms of like, oh, well, so in the universe, well, how do they use math? And it's like, well, the same way that we use it here, right? It's everywhere and in everything, right? There's math in how their technology works and functions, how it's programmed, how it's built. Everything has a shape. There's geometry to consider in that. If you ride the Millennium Falcon, you have to consider how fast you're going. And if you jump into light speed, go to hyperspace, you have to consider the speed of that happening. If you're dealing with lightsabers, there's so much to consider with that, right? Because you have to consider the length, you have to consider the light intensity, you got to consider your motion, and there's math in all of those and how those fights function and flow, both inside the universe and outside as well. So there's math in the universe like there is in our universe. Like every time someone is going out and about, there's math in that. There's math in how fast they move. There's math in their food. There's math in their music because music is a part of their universe too. There's math in how people interact with one another. Math is everywhere and in everything. It is the Force. Star Wars is, of course, no exception to that. And with the Force, we don't really get into it being measured in this movie. That comes a little later with the prequels, but the idea behind the scenes has always kind of been there. And that's a thing to consider, though, that it can be measured, which is still kind of crazy, but, mileage will vary on whether or not you like it. Most people don't. But in Empire, I feel like you see like these elaborate sets and you see something like Cloud City and you know that there's a lot of math and making that work, building that and having it function. So with all that in mind, I feel like because Star Wars has, it's this, sci-fi adventure film, this sci-fi adventure series, but there's some basis of it coming from reality, and as a result, math. Because, like I said, math is everywhere and in everything, right? And what we learn in the classroom is an extension of what we already do. So whether or not they are outright saying they're using math, and sometimes they do mention like mathematical concepts directly, the truth is they're doing math all the time. Now, with all of that out of the way, and I hope that you have some food for thought, I want to talk about why I like this movie so much. So, like I said, Star Wars was an incredible success. So, with Empire, it again had to be bigger, it had to be better, and it was much darker in some senses. But for the record, I don't count Star Wars as a light, breezy series. Although I think some people at the time, when they were talking about Empire, they didn't quite think that. Like, there's some people who thought, like, oh my god, it's darker now. Like, that ruins the light breeziness of, that first Star Wars, that was supposed to be kid friendly and da 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 da. But here's the thing, Star Wars has always been dark. Like, in that first movie, like, even the rebels are killing stormtroopers left and right, like it ain't a thing. They're, framed as a bad guy, sure, but murder is murder. You can justify it, and that's fair, but, it's dark, like, to the extent, but it goes deeper than that, too, right? Because we see Alderaan get blown up. Genocide on a planetary scale. Like, that is wild. We see the Death Star get blown up by the end of it. There was people in there. And even, like, early on, you had, like, Owen and Beru get burned to death. Like, that was a thing. So it's not like Star Wars was truly light and breezy like some people were thinking, but some people were taken aback at that time by Empire. But with that in mind, I like it because it establishes the characters even more than they already were. And, it kind of ups the stakes. Like, you have the rebels on the run. You have the characters who have formed, like, these bonds being in, like, danger pretty much the entire movie. And it does not end on a positive note. It ends on a downer. But not only that, right? You, of course, have some people returning. You have Luke, you have Leia, you have Han, you have Chewie, you have R2-D2, C-3PO, Darth Vader, all that good stuff. But there's new people who were brought in, right? You have Lando Calrissian, and with Lando portrayed by Billy D. Williams, and that is awesome. And he was the first black main character in a Star Wars show, and that is really cool. And you have the return of James Earl Jones is the voice of Darth Vader, which I will maintain is like the core of Darth Vader. Yes, the aesthetic is important, but come on, Vader without the voice, he ain't Vader. So it's good to see that he returned. And I feel like he's actually given more to do in this movie because look, I'm not gonna lie to y'all. Like I enjoyed New Hope, but Darth Vader kind of came off as a punk. Yeah, I said it. He had the whole intimidating thing, but like it feels like he's playing second fiddle to like Tarkin. And yeah, they fleshed that out over the years, but like, come on. So in the second one, he's back and he's stronger. But in terms of like, and you see that more. But in terms of new characters, like I said, Lando Calrissian, Yoda, the Emperor, like, and even though he was introduced in the holiday special, you have Boba Fett, which most people are going to be introduced to him through this movie, or have been introduced through him to him through this movie, and I think that's all really cool. And you see more about the Force, right? You see Vader just using it really coolly, really calmly, right? He's the bad guy, but this dude is like calm, like compared to the last movie, right? And Luke, you can see him coming a long way because in the first one you see him training, but it's been 3 years. Duke can fight now, but he's still trying to learn the ways of the Force, and that's where Yoda comes into play, right? Yoda is teaching him, and he's talking in this like different speech pattern, and he's doing crazy stuff like lifting X-wings out of the water, and showing him that looks can be deceiving. There's more to the Force than you think, and even though both Yoda and Obi-Wan wanted Luke to stay on Dagobah and complete his training and all that good stuff, he goes off to save his friends, and that's really cool. And of course, there's Hans, like his "I know" moment, and there's just again like there's so much cool stuff to it. I mean, like I said, like Vader, you can see him use the Force better or more because he's not just using it to choke people like he was before. He's pulling blasters. I guess you could argue it was his gloves that blocked the lasers, whatever. But he pulled that gun like it wasn't a thing. He's just directing, objects with ease. Using that telekinetic part of the Force like it ain't a thing. And you actually see him fight more elaborately. Like the fight between Luke and Vader is brilliant, freaking brilliant. It's like I feel like that's when like the lightsaber fight felt like a lightsaber fight, because in A New Hope it wasn't a bad lightsaber fight between Vader and Obi-Wan, and that is the first lightsaber fight that we ever see, but it's more about the talking, right? And this one it's different, right? Like you still have the emotional side of the battle, you still have the story that's trying to be told, but you see it more. Crazy stuff has happened in this fight. And also, I saw something like recently where someone pointed out something that absolutely wasn't intentional, but it kind of works. Like there's a point when Vader is fighting Luke, and he's like, "I see Obi-Wan has trained you well," right? And it was when Luke had jumped to the high ground, which is hysterical. But yeah, so back to the movie as a whole. I feel like it's really cool because it introduced like these new distinct characters right off the bat, as did the first one. But it kept those characters and it enriched them. It also brought like more to the Force, more to lightsabers, and just some of the most memorable moments and characters of all time. It set the bar ridiculously high, and even though I enjoyed several Star Wars movies after that one, I don't think they get as good as that one. And it became known as the sequel that was better than the original to a lot of people by a lot of metrics. And I mean, like I said, you don't have to agree with that, and that's fine, but I do agree with that. And let's not forget the cultural impact. Now, for a lot of movies, if they have a trilogy, they usually make the second one a bit darker, emulating like The Empire Strikes Back. there's also like so much that references about the movie, and at this point, you know, it's hard to not get spoiled that Luke is Darth Vader's son, that Darth Vader is Luke's father. Like it's hard to get around that because it is mentioned so much in like media. But what I wanted to do is just say like not only that, right? Uh, it made so much money. It became so profitable. There was a lot of merchandising that came out of that worked for people who had got a cut out of that. With like Lucas being largely in charge of that based on a deal, or like largely profited based on a deal that he made from the first Star Wars. But then the Empire Strikes Back was the first Star Wars product to be adapted to a video game, right? And there's a lot of math in gaming, right? I talk about that a lot. There's so much math and like things like health, sure, but like in fleshing out the worlds and the music and the programming and the user interface, the controls, and you, the player itself. And I also want to mention while I was here that one of the games that came out that featured some levels from the Empire was like Star Wars Trilogy Arcade. I played that when I was a kid. It was sick. Oh my god, it's an awesome experience. And if you think my future does not involve an arcade in some way, shape, or form, you would be sorely mistaken. But with that in mind, I enjoyed Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back growing up. Like I've enjoyed all the Star Wars movies to, varying degrees. But it's something that like it has never changed for me in terms of like me thinking like, oh, maybe this isn't as good as I remember. No, it's actually gotten better the more I've grown. So I think that is absolutely incredible. It is my favorite Star Wars movie and my favorite movie. And if you want to share your favorite Star Wars movie and your favorite movie, please feel free to, as well as discuss. And I do have I do have a video on Math and Star Wars that I made a year ago, where it was a little bit more general, but also talked about like some of the history behind Star Wars coming to be in the first place. And if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description. With that in mind, I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. See you in the future. Professor Prime out.